I want to give a quick shout out to all my patrons. Thank you so much for all of the continued support. And I am done. Okay, so I just finished reading Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, and I want to give you my unedited thoughts upon finishing this book, which was just right now. So I'm having trouble figuring out whether I, thought this one was just okay or whether I liked it. It's somewhere between there, so I'm going to give it a 3.5, which is where that should go on my rating scale, because 3 is like meh, and 4 is I liked it. So 3.5 sounds good. This was a hard one for me because I can recognize that there were things in here that were enjoyable. I think the premise of this book was better than the execution of this book. A lot of really good ideas, good pacing on the action, but enough faults, and I just am not into thriller type books. I mean, this isn't the type of book that I ever read. I read it because somebody chose it for me. So this book, I believe this was picked on the Patreon wheel. So I have a big wheel on my Patreon account. And if you're a member of the Patreon, you get to put a book or two, depending on the tier you are. And every month I spin the wheel, and whatever the wheel stops on, I have to read and review, which is where this came up. And it doesn't just have to be limited to fantasy or sci-fi. This one is kind of in the thriller sci-fi realm. I can't talk too much about why it is sci-fi without ruining too much. In general, my policy about spoilers, I know everybody kind of has their own definition of what spoilers are, but I like to only talk about things specifically that happen in the first, couple percentages of the book. The first chapter or so, depending on how big the first chapter is. In this case, this is a book about a man who lives in a very happy situation with his wife and his 2 kids, or 1 kid. And he's coming back from the bar one night to go back to his family, and he gets abducted. And he essentially gets put into some sort of interdimensional device that transports him to a new dimension, where he's back at the same time that he was in the same area that he was, but his wife doesn't live at the house anymore. He can't find her. Everything's kind of different, and he can't quite make sense of it. And he's got to figure it out. A lot of interesting twists happen from here involving, infinite timeline loop is kind of part of the thing here, with a really interesting take on it that I can't really talk about here with no spoilers. But it's a bit innovative in that sense. I mean, there's only so much you can do with infinite timelines and the way that kind of creeps up on you with lots of people showing up that's the same person in multiple, different places and dimensions and rips. And there's also a lot of faults with doing that way because, it's extremely hard to write a book that follows all the rules of the universe when you do that kind of thing. In general, this did a good job. And yeah, it's a basic thriller book that is pretty suspenseful. You don't really know where it's going to go, although you kind of get a sense of it as you're reading this thing. Even though I'm not a big thriller fan, I could kind of see where things were going to go, but it was fun. I've never read Blake Crouch before. This is a guy that I have heard really good things about. And ultimately, I'm not sure if he's for me. This feels like a Stephen King knockoff, if you will. Not knockoff in the sense that this is a book that Stephen King has written, but the style feels very reminiscent. An emphasis goes on the characters. It feels like the plot, in this case, a little bit better in some regards than a lot of Stephen King books because it feels plotted out. I get the sense that Blake Crouch kind of knew where he wanted to end this thing before he wrote it, which is definitely not the case for Stephen King books. And I've since found out that he just doesn't do that, which makes a lot more sense. He just writes and then lets the ending kind of write itself, which is a bizarre way to write, but whatever. But this guy feels like he's trying to be that, he writes the same kind of style of book. And if you're a big Stephen King fan, I imagine, I don't know this, but I imagine that there's a big crossover here. People like I don't follow a lot of booktubers, but somebody like Mike's Book Reviews, who I know loves Stephen King, if he read this book, maybe he has. My guess is he'd love it, And if you don't like Stephen King, like me, then you probably won't be as high on this style book. It's just kind of a preference thing. I found that the best thing about this book was the plot, though. And in general, that's the thing that I need my books to have, right? At least from my perspective. You can have a major fault in a lot of things, but if the plot's not there, you're going to have a problem. But if the plot sticks it, then, it can carry a lot of dead weight. In this case, I found the dead weight to be the characters. I didn't love them. I felt like he did a deep dive on these characters. We got a lot of time with them. You got to know them. But all the women characters felt pretty poorly done here. They felt like devices on, trying to be lustful towards them only. They didn't feel incredibly smart in this book. Just kind of dumb sex characters. And that doesn't, sit well with me. Just as awkward and weird, and they didn't need to be written that way. The major male character here, the main one, has some decent depth to him. He goes through a lot of life crises as he's trying to figure out, the answer to the story. But from a character perspective, and I guess it mingles with the plot a little bit, he's also kind of dumb, even though he's like this renowned scientist and is extremely brilliant. But as the reader, you understand where this plot is going and what's happening. Even though you've gotten all the same information that the main character has, it feels like he's playing catch up for a lot of this book. You're just like, when are you going to figure out what's going on that I already know? And that's a little bit frustrating from a plot perspective. Now, at a certain point in the book, things kind of take a faster pace in it. And I'd say this is around the 2/3 of the way through. We get to the crux of the book. And at that point, I did have a lot of fun. I was feeling like really down on this book. I felt like it was maybe like a 2-star book. But really, when we started cranking it out, I was like, okay, this is fun now. I'm enjoying myself. And there's so many different ways that we could go with the story. Once I found the innovative part of this to really take hold. And what it ended up with, I feel like, was a decent landing. I feel like, a lot of people could have wrote a more interesting, plan here, which is unfortunate because he put down some really good groundwork. And the way that he structured things and the science that he put in here was really fun. And then it just it didn't majorly fumble it, but I thought it wasn't great. The other problem I had with this book is the writing quality itself. Now, I know prose is totally subjective. I get that. But I often look at a book and I judge it based on, could I write that? If you gave me enough time, could I write dark matter? If I had a good enough idea for a story, could I bust out something, substantively similar? And I think the answer is yes. And I'm not a good writer. I'll never be a writer for books because I know I don't have that skill. So when I read somebody and I look at it and I go, yeah, I could have written that. That's not a great, scorecard for a book. Now, most of the books I read, I look back on it, even books that don't have wonderful writing, but are very innovative in the way that they piece things together. I sit back and go, I could never write that in a million years. And, I feel like that's the large majority of books that I read. But yeah, this just wasn't one of them. And so, yeah, I feel like the writing quality was pretty pedestrian. The science in it, I don't want to say magic because there's not, but the science in it was good. It was a decent part of the book, probably 4 stars. In the world itself, I can't really talk about world building in a thriller sci-fi book in modern times because it's just modern day America. But overall, it's decent. So ultimately, what do I recommend here? If you've read Stephen King and you like him, read this. You'll probably like it too. If you like thrillers and you haven't read Stephen King, I don't know that who is on that Venn diagram, who's caught in the middle of that. But if you do happen to be on that list, go read Stephen King, first of all, because he's probably just for you. But this will be in that realm of something you'd like as well. But if you really like just fantasy books and you're not big into sci-fi, and pass it. You don't need to be reading this. There's nothing super innovative here. Just decent stuff all around. I'm glad I read it. I'm glad I got to understand what Blake Crouch is all about. Maybe someday I'll give something else a chance if somebody's like, oh man, Dark Matter, it's good, but it's nothing even close to this. Maybe I'll give that a shot because, he had some good stuff here, and we'll see going forward. So that's it for my review. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, happy reading to you. Thanks again to all my patrons, with a special shout out to my Ascendant tier and Librarian tier patrons: Anna G, CJ, Doust, Darren, Gregory, Jonathan, Nathan T, Nev's Book Channel, 𝗏𝗏𝗏, Ron Reich, Russell, Ryan L, Sydney Baker, Tahir, Anna, Andra, Blair, Brock, Evan, Fanixan, Harry B, Joe, Kat Mick, Maria, Michael Sugarman, Sky, TW57, Wacky, and Zion. Thanks for sticking to the end of this video, and if you want to watch some more content from my channel, click over here and I've got some good videos for you. Thanks so much.